Hello. Okay, let me see if I can get things working better. Okay. And do excuse me while I set this up. Just want to make sure that it's working on all the... Okay. I know on Facebook it's a little bit trickier sometimes, but welcome to those of you already here. It's good to see you. Just move this to the side. Can you hopefully... Yes, there we go. It's all working. Yeah, welcome everyone to the live. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit in the beginning about a question that comes up again and again and again, and that is, when is a language a language? And where I see a lot of things, a lot of discussion going on about this topic is about linguistics, and linguistically speaking, where does a language start and where is a dialect and all that kind of stuff. Now, I kind of have very mixed feelings about this whole discussion, partly because I speak a number of languages that are mutually intelligible, and so I get when people say, oh, you know, if you can understand them, they're dialects. And the thing is that it's not strictly true. And the reason it's not strictly true is because there are a number of languages in the world where the languages are actually mutually intelligible, in terms of a person from a country, from country A, can go to country B, or even a region within countries, from one region to the other, and they'll be able to get by understanding each other, and that works, which is great. I mean, even in my own home country of the UK, I mean, an English speaker and a Scots speaker can communicate to a very large degree. They're not going to get every single thing that the Scots person says, particularly the English speaker, whereas the other way around, clearly, people in Scotland learn Scottish English, and so there's English and there's Scots, and then there's also Gaelic, which is a completely different language. And I don't think there's any discussions with languages that are very much in a different language family. However, when it gets to languages that are sort of in the same language family, like say Germanic languages, like Scots, English, like other Scandinavian tongues like Swedish and Norwegian and Danish, there's a large amount of mutual intelligibility between these languages. And they're not the only languages, there are many of them. The thing is that when countries tend to be separate entities, like Sweden and Norway, for example, and Denmark, people don't really question it so much. And I don't know how much linguists really talk as much about that or even if they do, I don't think that any side of any argument on a sort of a layperson level really takes on board what those linguistic contributions are. They just say, oh yeah, they're mutually intelligible and everyone's happy and we all walk away and everyone's fine. The issue happens when we talk about countries or peoples or regions where there is a degree of mutual intelligibility, but actually we're witnessing the evolution of language. So what we're going through is something that's happened for millennia, all through humanity, is that people break off into different groups at different points in history, and they start to identify and to build their identity, their national or their group identity. I mean, we talk about national identities nowadays, but that's only a few centuries old. I mean, the idea of all of these different countries and passports and all that kind of stuff, in terms of human history, it's quite a recent thing. But in terms of you know, what we talk about nowadays, we do talk about countries, we talk about separate regions and things, but realistically there's always been this kind of mix, and there's always been continuums of languages and dialects and whatever you want to call them, all the way through, and there sort of still is to this day. So you get things that come across, for example, like we were always told at school, if you were to start walking from the top of France all the way down to the bottom of Italy, you'd go through towns and villages where each town or village would understand the next one along. But if you were then to take somebody from the north of France, someone at the bottom of Italy, and put them in a room together, they wouldn't understand each other. Where does that breakdown in communication begin, so that you can then say that they speak two different languages, because they're no longer easily mutually intelligible? They may have words in common, they may have things, but it's changed so much that they can't really easily communicate. And that is a valid question, and it's a linguistic question as to where these things change. And I believe that linguists and linguistics definitely have their place in this kind of discussion. Where I find it kind of sort of unhelpful, is when we're talking about the evolution of people and peoples and their identities and their sort of their group identities, particularly in terms of, do they identify with a certain other group of people or not, or are they then branching out and splitting up? Now, a peaceful break from within groups can be facilitated, and it can also be made more acrimonious. And you can get countries like Czech Republic and Slovakia, where it's, again, like in the Scandinavian countries, it's often considered that the two languages are fairly mutually intelligible. And you speak Czech and you speak Slovak. As someone who learned Czech, I've never had a problem going to Slovakia and communicating for pretty much everything I want in Czech, and they speak Slovak back to me. I'm not saying that they're the same language, obviously they're not. Czech is Czech and Slovak is Slovak, but the languages are mutually intelligible to a very high degree. Now, the thing is, because the split from Czechoslovakia to Czech Republic or Czechia and Slovakia was quite a peaceful one, relatively speaking, in terms of breakups of countries and nations. There's not really a big bone of contention. Now, when you move to other parts of the world, this becomes more problematic. And I think when we talk about these kinds of things in the context of, let's say, the Balkans, for example, it gets very, very complicated, because there's an awful lot of history to unpick and unravel. And it's a very strange thing to sort of to deal with in sort of a video or even a short presentation. This is something that people write long theses about and investigate for a number of years, and that's just all the aspects. Where I think it's slightly unhelpful, as somebody who loves languages, and somebody who loves all languages, and all languages that are similar to those languages, whether they consider themselves dialects or not, is to just let people label their own group identity and not mess around with their being, in terms of, otherwise we're kind of messing around with the natural evolution of things, right? Or even if it feels forced, sometimes these things are forced in certain aspects, and that's because they're trying to assert an identity, or sort of make sure that they feel solid in that identity. And that can be for many historical reasons, it can be for cultural reasons, it can be for all sorts of reasons why people do that in the world. I think language, though, is the vehicle of culture. It's the vehicle of the history and this shared collectivity of a nation or a group of people that identify as belonging to the same group, and therefore different to another group. And I think it's useful and helpful for us to just recognize there are similarities, maybe even a high degree of mutual intelligibility, but telling people, like, you are this and you are that, is basically, it's asserting an identity that they don't necessarily want to assume, or they don't identify with anymore. And people are quite they have the right to to be who they are, and they what they sort of I think that sometimes with linguists and sometimes with people just generally who maybe read a lot about historical facts that are represented by the winning side or the bigger side or the side with the biggest voice. Sometimes it's in history as well as in just general life. There is always at least 2 or 3 sides, maybe even more, to every single story, and we're never going to be able to unpick all of that history. The only thing we can do is recognize that it is complex, recognize that it's multifaceted, and recognize that these kinds of issues will persist. As long as humanity continues, they will persist, because that's just the way humanity works. I mean, that's the way our nations have evolved. That's the way our languages, as they are today, have evolved. And one thing I would say is that we have in the past, in terms of as world, people, some nations have tried to dominate other countries and cultures and languages, and even commit linguicide, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and both cases have happened throughout history. And these kinds of things are things that I think we as humans today should be learning from. That there does need to be a kind of a healthy respect for other people and their languages and their cultures, and to not look down on them or to see them as inferior because somebody somewhere says, okay, no, I don't believe your identity at all, or your language or anything. You're just a dialect, or you're just this, or you're just that. It's unhelpful, is I think what I think it is. And I do find it interesting, just generally on this topic of linguistic identity and sort of group identity and national identity, how there are some splits, particularly in Europe. And I'm going to give some examples in Europe that I find particularly interesting. The first example is one that I gave was with Scotland, and that is the Scots language. And the Scots language was used as a language in Scotland for centuries, and no one ever questioned whether or not there was a language called Scots. That's kind of, again, another recent thing, and it comes from the English asserting themselves in Scotland, having Scottish English as a variant of English, and the two languages merging very commonly for most of the people of Scotland. And so the line, the delineation between Scots and English for many people has become blurred, because they've sort of almost like creolized Scots and Scottish English. For some people, though, this hasn't happened to the same extent, and they have two languages that they speak quite distinctly, and they're aware of different grammatical structures and rules, as well as different vocabulary. And this becomes problematic, because people being told in Scotland, you speak bad English, it's bad English, and it's not necessarily the case. They were speaking Scots, and this is a sort of a thing that happens sometimes in countries where even the people of the country where the language is from have almost lost sight of the history of their own language. And this can happen. And there are indeed voices in Scotland where people would actually say, actually, no, Scots is just bad English. And they would agree with this English point of view that was sort of put on them, which is, for me, a really interesting thing. The opposite happened in Luxembourg. So as far as I understand from the history of Luxembourg, Luxembourgers were very happy just talking away in Luxembourgish, not really identifying it as a language or a dialect, or even really caring about it, until the Second World War. And then when Germany was trying to assert itself as, actually, you speak German, that's kind of when more voices started rising out of Luxembourg saying, actually, no, it's Luxembourgish, it's different. And it's grown over the last few decades. I mean, this is quite a recent thing where Luxembourgish, in terms of sort of the span of languages, Luxembourgish has grown, and it's grown in sort of the importance within Luxembourg and how it's seen. Courses for foreigners have been created, and I remember seeing the first types of books like this for Luxembourgish and thinking it was a wonderful thing. And it's funny because Luxembourg is a sovereign state. I think that people agree on Luxembourg as a sovereign state, and they agree on sort of how the country is set up. It's really interesting to see that that people don't really question Luxembourgish as a language. Now you have a very different state of affairs in Switzerland. In Switzerland, Swiss German. I mean, in Germany, you need subtitles to read Swiss German. You can't understand Swiss German automatically or very easily from High German. You definitely need help with the translation. And strangely, many German speakers from Germany, they think that people are speaking Swiss German to them when they're actually speaking High German with a Swiss accent. Now, when they go into full Swiss German, it's a completely different thing. Now, from my point of view, and this is just my own personal point of view, it feels like a different language. I respect Swiss people's opinion on this, and many of them still talk about this, and I've not really met anybody from Switzerland yet. And if you are from Switzerland and you're watching this and you believe Swiss German is a language, then I would respect that too. Because in fact, I was surprised by the reactions of Swiss people that I did meet, who said, actually, no, it's just a dialect. And I found that quite strange because of the huge differences between the two variants, standard German Hochdeutsch and Schweizerdeutsch. And Schweizerdeutsch in and of itself actually isn't really a term in Switzerland that they would use so commonly. They would talk about Zürichdeutsch or Berndeutsch. They talk about different types of German from Deutsch is their German word for Deutsch, Deutsch, and then Bern, or Zurich, or Zug, or whatever it is, whichever part of Switzerland they come from. They would talk about that. But I do find this topic super interesting, and the reason I picked it today was I saw some things that and I've obviously been working a lot over the last year as well with doing the language events in Scotland, and it was a topic of conversation in Scotland. That and I do find that to be quite an interesting thing, where people make this distinction, and then where outsiders feel they have the right to dictate what those people should think or what they should be. I'm definitely more on the side of it's fine to feel and to think what you want to think, but to prescribe what other people should think about their own identity, for me, that's kind of where my opinion ends and your own identity begins. That's not my business at all. How another person identifies. I mean, it actually makes no difference to my own identity, because I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I know who I am, and I know where I'm from, and I know to a very large degree about my history, and so I don't need to get that from elsewhere, and so likewise, I wouldn't prescribe that to other people either. I mean, if they wanted to talk openly about it, I'm very happy, of course, and I'm very happy to learn more than anything else. But I would be interested to see what your thoughts are on this. I mean, I know it can be kind of a controversial topic sometimes, and I see that a lot of people sort of get very excited about this. And in fact, I don't know how much need there is for people to be overly bothered by other people's identity. From my point of view, I think that I don't feel threatened by somebody else's identity personally, and so I'm happy to just listen to what people say and think. But yeah, I'd be interested to know what you think on this topic, and also where you think this sort of this natural evolution of languages and peoples, because we all know that we came from a certain point. Slavic languages, the Germanic languages, the Latin languages. You can sort of draw these. You see all the language family trees, right? So we know that there was a starting point here where they all came from. So it's no great surprise that Russians, Ukrainians, Serbs, and whoever else are all related in some way in terms of linguistically, they came from this old church Slavonic or whatever they came from. Same with the Germanic languages. You could go back through to Gothic and sort of, and with the Latin languages to Latin, and so it is interesting. I find where these splits occur, and to recognize that we're still going through this. This isn't a finished version of where we are. This is constantly evolving, and it will constantly evolve. I mean, we see English evolving all around the world. In Singapore, English became a national language. And what's Singapore done with English? It's turned it into Singlish as well. So we have Singlish in Singapore. Will that one day become a language in its own right? Possibly. Who knows? Who knows what will happen in the end? Will it become a standardized, accepted form and a legitimate form to use? If it's the mother tongue of enough people, if it's the language that people speak at home, and it's actually Singlish and not English, when do you start to break away from the language of origin, or the point of origin where we started to diverge? I think it's an interesting thing. Yeah, I'd like to know what you think, and thank you for listening to me. I appreciate that. I've talked quite a lot about my thoughts on this, and yeah, I'd love to know what you think as well. I'm just seeing if I can see any questions here. I can't see anything on live chat in, let me see. Oh, there are some questions coming in. I can see they didn't come up for some strange reason, but now they are. Let me just have a look. So yes, that was my first thing. So now I'm going to go back and see if I've got any questions that I have from you that I can answer. Wow, I can see lots of things here on Instagram that are coming in. So let me just have a quick look through and make sure that I'm not missing all of these. Okay. So Norwegian and Swedish could be seen as dialects of the same language. And that's what they teach here in Finland. Only the borders, separate the languages, really. Yeah, this is the thing is, I mean, I think linguistically they probably could be seen that way. But this is where I think linguistics actually isn't helpful in these kinds of discussions, because for languages like Swedish and Norwegian, where Sweden, Denmark, Norway, they're all very sort of sure in their identity, and their borders are quite fixed, and people sort of, they're countries that are doing well. They're not being picked on by other countries or being overlooked politically or being taken advantage of in any way economically, in the same way as other countries around the world. And there are many countries in these kinds of positions. I think they feel robust enough to be able to take that. There are other countries, I think, that makes it very difficult, and not through any fault of their own. They're often, they can be marginalized and made to feel like they're not as worthwhile, or the sort of, their position can be deflated by these kinds of comments. And this is where I think linguistics belongs sometimes in the linguistics room, where you're talking about it with other linguists to understand the issues and what you're talking about, right? And they're not some kind of bits of information that lay people will take without fully understanding the context of things, or the greater context, and then using it for their own political agendas. And this is unfortunately sometimes what we see happen. I think that's the kind of difference that I like to make with this. Yes, let me see. Zdravo, zdravo. Let me see. J'étais d'accord, merci. Ok, bien. Les orthographes, oui. Oui, ça dépend vraiment, les orthographes, en fait, comment on écrit les langues différentes. Par exemple, le créole haïtien, par exemple, c'est le français ou c'est pas? À vrai dire, c'est très intéressant de savoir comment on pense, parce que quand je vois les cruel, le créole haïtien, j'arrive pas à comprendre. Il faut que je lise à voix haute, juste pour voir si j'arrive à comprendre quelques mots, quoi. C'est vachement difficile, c'est pas si facile que ça à dire, hein. Okay. Okay. What motivates you to learn lots of languages? Um, this unbelievable. Okay, at least 50 languages to learn. Okay, yeah. Thank you. That's very kind of inspiring. Thank you. So yeah, I like to learn languages because I like to understand different people, and so sometimes I like to learn languages that are even considered like creoles or dialects, just because I find it super interesting from sort of to get under the skin of the languages and to find out more about the people that speak them. I find that you get some bits of information from the how the people react that you don't get if you just read about them in the same way. It's an interesting thing how people react, and I've definitely experienced that and experienced some of the issues, the underlying issues that you don't normally hear about by learning some of these languages. So that's one of the reasons. The other one is that I just love languages and like to know how they work, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. Um, for example, there are Arabic dialects that aren't mutually intelligible. Yeah, exactly. So even with the Arabic dialects, and still people do choose to identify as being the same language. I think with Arabic, and any Arabic speakers out there, please do correct me if you feel I'm wrong with this. I think with Arabic, I think the Quran has a lot to do with why Arabic speakers will choose to identify with modern standard Arabic and therefore be happy with the term dialects. And also the countries themselves are quite distinct countries and have been for a while. But I feel that might be one of the reasons why with Arabic, for example, there's kind of a people are okay with the whole idea of it being dialects of Arabic because of the Quran and because people learn Fusha standard Arabic at school. So they will learn this type of Arabic, kind of like people would learn Latin and then they would learn Italian or French or Spanish or whatever on the streets, and they'd speak the different sort of dialects of Latin as they then were in different parts of the Roman Empire. And but then they'd have standard Latin they may learn. This could have been this could be a similar thing that we're seeing. I would be shocked if we don't see more development in the Arabic language world in the future. I would be very shocked. For example, for me, a very like the Maghrebi dialects, for example, that people talk about the Maghrebi dialects of Arabic. I would be surprised if there weren't any voices at all to say that actually no, they're quite different languages in certain ways. I mean, Maltese has been through this because it was originally seen as an Arabic dialect, and Maltese is definitely recognized as a language. In fact, it's one of the official languages of the European Union. And again, the dialect that's most similar to it is the Tunisian Arabic. Obviously, look, geographically, the proximity is there, so it makes sense. It's just been mixed a lot more with other languages, particularly later, instead of the Italian and French, as well, also English. So there are a number of English words in Maltese, but and it's obviously the only one that's written in Latin script, which does make a difference as well. But it's funny when you look at Maltese and you sort of you see this Arabic in it. It's quite interesting. I actually really like Maltese. So yes, I wonder. I do wonder where it will go in the future. It feels like one of those series you watch on Netflix, and you know you're not going to see all of the following series, but it's quite interesting to sort of think about where it might go in the future. I've always sort of contemplated where will things end up, especially with languages like English, where will American become American one day, and will British be sort of just English? Will the United States one day say, actually, no, we speak American, and it will not just be a joke or a meme on social media? Completely possible. I mean, why not? I guess again, I mean, in some way, it is a different language, but then in others, obviously, English is it's called English as well. But I'm sure I remember something about in some part of linguistics when you talk about American English, actually, you can classify it as a different language. I think it's probably from the pronunciation and the spelling, but I don't want to be quoted on that because I'm not a linguist. So I just want to sort of I remember something from my studies of English years ago about that, and I found it quite strange. Okay, how do we do that they don't get confused between the same languages that we know them? Oh, not mixing up languages. Learn the first one well, and then go to the next one, and then start practicing them back to back. I think it's easy. It's the easiest way to do it. How can we learn the fundamentals of Scottish English? Scottish English, a lot of that's to do with the pronunciation, but there will be small differences, the same as there are differences between Canadian English, Australian English, New Zealand English, Indian English, American English, British English, or English, whichever one you want to call. There's kind of this. There are different standards of pronunciation. So my pronunciation, for example, of English right now is Northern received pronunciation of English. So I have certain vowel sounds in my English that are typical of the English that I speak. Like, for example, the word grass. I say grass and not grass. And Scottish English will also have its own variants as well of English. And in fact, I believe there are dictionaries that actually allow for Scottish variants. So there may even be words that are used that are not commonly used in other parts of the English-speaking world. But they're not. They may have some elements of Scots where Scots is mixed in, but it's not Scots. And this is, I think, where the confusion arises in Scotland between Scots and Scottish English. Because they are mixed, quite commonly people code switch between the two languages quite frequently. Let me see. Is Luxembourgish a mix of many different languages, or is it an independent language? Luxembourgish is pretty much agreed it's an independent language. It's a language in its own right. It's Germanic base, and it has a number of French words on top of it as well. A bit like English. English is a Germanic base with over 60% French words mixed in. Well, French or Latin-based words from Norman French. I mean, there's a whole, you can go into many videos about English, but yeah, basically, I mean, English is also a similar type of thing. Luxembourgish does have a lot more of a Germanic feel to it than English, because the verb forms and things feel a lot more similar to some other Germanic languages on the mainland of Europe, whereas English has lost a lot of the conjugations, for example. We only really have one or two changes in our verb form. So what is it? So I speak, you speak, he speaks, we speak, they speak. So we only change the verb twice for it to add an S for the third person singular. Whereas Luxembourgish changes a little bit more than that when they speak. I'm just going to see if I can see any more questions here. Is Flemish and Dutch, are they the same language? So Flemish and Dutch are it's an interesting question. So in Belgium, as far as I'm aware, they still actually list their national languages, their official languages in Belgium, as French, Dutch, and German. And the reason they call it Dutch and not Flemish in the as the official languages is because they talk about the official language being Dutch, but the spoken language on the street, how they use the language, is Flemish. And so how they, maybe one day they will have that as a separate thing. Afrikaans went through a similar process where it was seen as Cape Dutch or Dutch, Cape Dutch, and then it was recognized as Afrikaans as a different language over time. And this is because the language changed to the point that it became a separate language. Now, there's a high degree of mutual intelligibility as well between Afrikaans and Flemish particularly, but also with Dutch. So it's a good question, but yes, I don't think Belgium is there as calling Flemish the language that they teach at school or things like that. I think that they still, and please, if anyone from Belgium is watching this, please do correct me if I'm wrong on this. My understanding has been that in Belgium you learn Dutch as a language, but you speak Flemish as a spoken language. From your opinion, what do you think is easier for an English speaker to learn, Spanish or Portuguese? Spanish, because Portuguese has more I want to say more grammar, but it has more things to learn in terms of verb forms. So in Portuguese, they have, in Spanish, you have the subjunctive mood, which you need to learn, which comes in Spanish just in the present tense and in the past, so in subjunctive, but in perfect subjunctive. And then in Portuguese, you also have the future subjunctive, and you also have to conjugate the infinitive, which makes Portuguese a little bit more tricky. I think. And otherwise, the grammars are fairly similar. They're the main things I find that are different. Can we say the same things about Romance languages spoken in both sides of the Atlantic? Potentially, you can. I think that when you talk about a great expanse of water separating languages and that were one language. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why they can't eventually diverge and become separate languages. It depends on people deciding that. I mean, people could argue Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese could. I think they are probably those languages, or that language, Portuguese, and French with Quebecois, Quebec French. I think they are the closest to of the European languages for actually being at a point to be able to do that. Because in Brazil, they don't have much contact with European Portuguese, and they find it quite difficult to understand sometimes, just genuinely. The other way around is not true, because they have a lot of Brazilian programs in Portugal, and so they're more used to listening and hearing Brazilian Portuguese. Quebecois, for example, the Quebecois, when a French person speaks in Quebec, they tend to standardize their French, because they know they won't understand everything if they speak just solid, fluent Quebecois. It would be quite difficult for them, and so I've had that experience personally, where people have adjusted their French, when they'll speak Quebecois, and then they'll turn to me when I'm speaking to them, and they will kind of put on this school French. But the interesting thing with Quebec is that they do learn the standard, sort of almost like European French at school. And again, if you're from Canada and you have this experience, please do agree, disagree in the comments. But yeah, I feel that those two are probably the first that could do that. Spanish is less likely. I mean, I was actually very surprised in Mexico that in Cancun, the Spanish is actually very, very similar to what I would hear in some parts of Europe as well. It's not that hugely different, surprisingly so. And I think it's partly because people from all over Mexico arrive in Cancun. They come from all over Mexico, and they speak a more standard form of the language instead of going into their and other dialects, and it's made this sort of very standardized Spanish that's doesn't sound. I mean, to be honest, my typical sort of idea of a Mexican Spanish really was not what I found in Cancun. Although when I went to Cholula, I found this lovely Mexican Spanish, and yeah, I really actually quite like all these kinds of things. So let me just see if I can answer some more questions here. I'm sorry, I've got quite a lot of questions on this, and I'm very glad that that you've all come to sort of listen and to add as well. Hello to everyone who's joined, by the way. Sorry if I haven't seen you. So, Alex, you're asking inspiration. Thank you very much. You're 16, okay, and you're going to become a polyglot. I'm sure you will, Alex. That's really, really cool. What order would you suggest learning the Romance languages? Depends. And then with German and Russian, then Asian languages. Alex, it depends on the languages you speak. So if you want to learn the Romance languages, from an English-speaking point of view, I found French. I mean, I just learned French as my first language after English, and my first Romance language, therefore. And I found it quite a good introduction to Romance languages, because it's very similar to English in a lot of ways. And then from there, it helped me learn Spanish and the other languages as well. And I'd say German is pretty good as well for the same reason. It's good to go out from German. Although my first Germanic language that I learnt after English was Swedish, and then I learnt German after Swedish, and then Dutch, and then a number of others. But yeah, slowly but surely is the way, and I think the ones that you have most contact with makes the most sense. There's definitely not one rule for this, unfortunately. Okay, let me see. I think there should be one method to learn a language, but sadly, most companies and books make money, such as is the case with Arabic language, Russian, Turkish. So there are people that have a kind of one method to learn language. That does exist. There are books. I'm not entirely convinced that one method for every single language works. Unfortunately, I have to slightly disagree with you there. And the reason is that what you need to learn and what you need to focus on in each individual language is quite different. So, for example, if you were to go on about verbs all the time and the conjugations of verbs like you have to do for French or Spanish or Italian or German or any of these, and then you try to do the same thing for Swedish or Afrikaans or even, I mean, the difference with like verb forms, for example, in Indonesian, the verbs are problematic, but in a very different way. So talking about conjugations when you don't really have a different form of the verb makes little sense. Whereas in the other languages, you need an awful lot of time to really learn the different verb forms. And a similar thing happens with Russian, for example. You've given Russian as an example there. So learning Russian, you have all of the cases to deal with, and you don't have that in other languages. In Turkish, you have cases, but the case system in Turkish is called the case system because linguists decided that based on the Latin, where sort of they got a lot of these names from, that it was a case system. It's a case system, but it's a very different type of case system than, say, Russian or Slavic languages generally, because in Turkish, it's pretty regular how you form these endings, and they're just suffixes that you add. It's an agglutinative language. It means you add to the end of a word to form the case, which is not the case for, say, German, where you might change the word completely, or Russian, where you change the word completely sometimes. So yeah, it's a bit different in that way. So therefore, I think that you do need to have slightly different focuses on each language. Can you describe how long it took you to get to a point where learning a language wasn't difficult anymore? When did you identify as a polyglot? Okay, good question, Alex. If I ever get to the point where learning a language isn't difficult anymore, I will let you know. Unfortunately, I still have the same types of things that I have to deal with learning a language. It takes a long time to get the words in my head. It takes a long time to get things right. It takes a lot of time to start speaking well. It just all takes a long time, unfortunately. And when I identified as a polyglot, actually, it was the term was given to me by French people, because in French, the word polyglot is actually very common, and people use it a lot more than in English. And so I was called a polyglot by them, and it kind of stuck. So I called myself a polyglot, but I didn't really. I had the French idea of a polyglot at that time, speaking a few languages, and that was it. And it just kind of stuck in this community where we talk about, language learning community, where we talk about polyglots and hyper polyglots and all this stuff. It's all very arbitrary, to be honest with you. And I mean, I don't mind if somebody says that I'm whatever. I don't mind. I really don't mind. I've just always liked lots of languages, as long as I can remember, to be honest. I think learning similar languages that you already speak does help, such as English learning Spanish. Yeah, absolutely, Ebru. That's true. And it also helps your vocabulary in your own languages as well. I learned a lot of things in English through French and through Spanish, and even through Turkish, strangely enough. I learned some new words in English through Turkish. I didn't ever use the word kısmet in English, and I quite like that word. And I learned that in Turkish first, even though it's used, I think it's used a lot more in the US than it is in the UK, because of the sort of the the Jewish Yiddish community. I think it was used a lot more there, whereas I didn't experience that in the part of the UK where I grew up. And the other word I learned through Turkish is hadia. No, sorry, what's the word? Huria. And in Turkish, it's huri. Huri gibi bir insan. It's a huria is an Arabic word that went through Turkish, and we have it in English. And I probably think we took it directly from Arabic, actually, in English, because we have this huria version, which sounds more Arabic to me. And it's kind of like an in-flight creature that's very, an nymph-like creature that's very pretty. And so in Turkish, it's used as, if someone's very, very pretty, you say, huri gibi bir insan, huri gibi bir kadın. Yeah, she's like a huria. And I didn't know what it was, and my teacher couldn't really explain it to my satisfaction. Then I looked up in the dictionary, it was the same word. I was like, okay, I give up, that's just a new word in English. Yeah, okay, let me see. See if I can see, okay. A few of these questions, unfortunately, are going so fast that I can't see them. But do stick with me. I'm getting there. When I first started thinking about talking about these kinds of questions, I did think, okay, so as a linguist, I've studied this subject in depth, and I've seen a lot of different opinions about a lot of different definitions of language and dialect. Yeah, Inge, it's nice for you to comment actually as a linguist, and I do find, obviously, I'm very open to sort of and interested in hearing what linguists think. I do sometimes think that when it gets taken out of linguists' hands and used by the general population, it can become problematic and weaponized, unfortunately. And that's kind of where I feel that it's not helpful for some of these some of these pronouncements of languages. Hola Richard, ¿algún consejo en español? Soy de Perú y quiero aprender inglés y alemán. Gracias. Pues lo mejor es hacer un poco cada día. Así que en internet, si quieres aprender inglés y alemán, hay una serie que se llama, en YouTube puedes encontrar esto, se llama Extra. Se escribe EXTR y luego puedes poner English o German o alemán inglés. Y así que van a empezar con algunos episodios en los dos idiomas, y poco a poco vas aprendiendo el idioma así, y te va a ayudar a tener un poco más contacto con el idioma en un contexto para alguien aprendiendo el idioma desde el principio. Así que te va a ayudar un poco, ¿vale? Y luego la cosa más importante es practicar el idioma y estudiar también y repasar los apuntes, el vocabulario, intentar también no solo memorizar las cosas, pero también utilizarlas para tener más experiencia con el idioma. Scandinavian languages are very often used as an example of dialects that are wrongly labeled as languages. Oh, that's interesting, Inga. I find that an interesting thing. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I do wonder where the arbitrary nature of the language dialect divide comes in. But I think they are, as I said before, I think they are quite robust countries to deal with that kind of thing. As a Norwegian, I have a very strong personal feeling and opinions about it, and I would certainly claim that Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish are separate and quite distinct languages. Yeah, Inga, it's quite nice that you said that as well. I like that you said that, because it really does highlight the point I was trying to make, that linguistically is one thing, and how people and groups of people feel about having labels put on them when they're not even asking for that, I think is a different thing. I think this is the thing, it's if we feel comfortable in our own skin, why do we need to assert somebody else's identity? I mean, it's an absolute nonsense to me. you can be whatever you want to be. I mean, as long as you're not telling me who I am, then you know, there are certain truths about me that I can tell you and you can repeat back to me, but projecting onto other people, I think, is a slippery slope into some quite murky waters quite often. Quranic Arabic and standard, very different Quranic. Yeah, it is, Ebru. So yeah, Quranic Arabic. So I was talking about, I think when I was talking more about the Arabic, I guess I meant more sort of it's one of those things that people sort of look towards in Muslim countries as sort of a, you know, Quranic Arabic, and then you learn Fusha. So there's kind of this meeting of sort of an agreement of we belong to this brotherhood or this sisterhood or this community. Do you know what I mean? I think that's kind of where I'm getting at with that. More than Quranic Arabic. Quranic Arabic, as you rightly said, classical Arabic and Quranic Arabic, very, very different to what people speak on the street, of course. Muchas gracias, ¿eh? Oh, lo agradezco mucho, Santana. Muchas gracias. Mi voz tranquilizador, muchas gracias, ¿eh? Lo agradezco mucho. Okay, Inga says, although we have a high degree of mutual intelligibility, one argument speaks to the fact that even if we can passively understand each other's languages, we are not automatically able to produce them actively. That's absolutely correct. They are actually quite different on a phonological, morphological, and even syntaxical level. Absolutely. We get this a lot as well in other places where people do imagine that there's a degree of mutual intelligibility, and therefore you can then it's almost interchangeable. That's actually not true even on a dialectal level, no matter how you cut the cake. Even accents, for example, in the United Kingdom, where I'm from, try and get somebody to faithfully reproduce the local accent and dialect of another part of the UK, and they both say that they both agree that they are from the same country and speak the same language. I have very, very, I think maybe not even once actually, heard somebody faithfully reproduce my original dialect of English, which is Scouse. It's very difficult for somebody who's not from there to reproduce, because they don't necessarily know the grammatical structures of the dialect, and so it would be absurd, even amongst dialects, let alone languages. I think that it is quite misguided to sort of think that you can reproduce things easily, and there are certain things you can do an accent. Like I can try and put on a Swiss German accent, for example, in German, and people from Germany will be fooled to some degree, but not people from Switzerland. Absolutely not. And it's a similar thing around the UK, just even with dialects. Muchas gracias, Alex. A ver. Wow. I can see I like that you're all talking together as well. It's nice. I wonder if dialects could be considered as official or national languages if they are only spoken and not written. It'd be insightful to have your point of view. So, if they could be considered as official or national languages, I mean, in terms of the language itself, the standard language is still a dialect of the language to which all of the dialects belong. So in a way, that already happens. I think, David, and I think so. Whether you're talking about a standard English that was chosen or a standard French that was chosen, or they were all dialects that were chosen to be the standard language. So in essence, they are still dialects as well. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Inga, but that's my understanding of this. So sometimes the whole dialect language thing is actually just really unhelpful for this reason, because it gives priority over one than the other. And I mean, I get that you need to have a form that you will use to teach, to produce books in. How important is that in real terms? Are there societies where that doesn't matter so much. I mean, you've got languages where they have a couple of standards, right? It's not just one. So, for example, you have two main dialects of Albanian. You have Toshk and Geg. And Geg is used in the north and Toshk in the south, generally speaking. Toshk has been used as the standard Albanian generally, and is what you tend to hear and read, whereas Geg is the one that I hear most. And Geg is different, even within Geg Albanian, there are different versions of it. There's different versions in Kosovo, there's different versions in North Macedonia, and there's different versions in northern Albania. How do you decide which is the right way to say it? Sometimes you just agree that there are different ways of saying it, I guess. Norway's been through some quite complicated things like this, and I think Inga might have something to say on this. With bokmål and nynorsk, it's quite a complicated scenario where the dialects of Norway also has many dialects, and similar thing in Slovenian. The Slovenian that you read in a book is not a Slovenian that somebody speaks. It's like Fusha. It's only in like news, official things. Fusha Arabic. It's not something people tend to speak. They refer back to it if they're with another speaker of another Arabic, from another Arabic-speaking country, and they don't understand the local word, so they use the Fusha word that they can go back to and they both understand. And a similar I mean, in Slovenia, again, there are, I think, is it over 30 dialects within Slovenia. They agree they're dialects of Slovenian, but they're different. And Slovenian is held up as this language in Europe that has the dual, for example, which is one of the, I think, maybe the only language in the Indo-European group that has a full dual. I'm not talking about bits of dual, because we have bits of dual in a lot of languages, not just in Slovenian. But in Slovene, we do have the full dual in sort of verb conjugations and all sorts. And but there are dialects of Slovenian where that doesn't exist in the same way. So, but they use this sort of standard version that for TV and for education and all that kind of stuff. It's very complicated, but great question. I love these questions that you've got. I'm just trying to look at the time now. My word, I've been talking about this for an hour. I can't believe it. I could talk about this for a long time, and I'm sure. I hope that you found it interesting. Richard, apa kabar? Baik. Terima kasih. Apa kabar? Indonesia. Neapolitan and other Italian dialects formed independently from Latin, but sometimes are still close to standard. Yeah, that's true. So some languages sort of came from the same root, but they remained quite close. Other languages sort of, it just depends on how they've all changed. I think there's quite a lot of the what they call dialects of Italy that people now recognize that are languages. Similar thing with Chinese. Like Chinese dialects is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, in all intents and purposes, they're pretty much languages. To a large degree. Puedes decir en Macedonia la diferencia entre Macedonia y búlgaro. ¿Cuánto búlgaro crees que se puede entender sin estudios formales si eres de Macedonia? Depende de dónde eres en Macedonia. Si eres de, por ejemplo, donde está la frontera con Bulgaria, pues bastante bien, porque los dialectos son casi comprensibles, ¿no? Casi 100%, pero depende. Es un poco como el sueco y el noruego. Si, por ejemplo, hago una mesa con gente macedonesa hablando macedonés, pues van a entender el idioma hasta un cierto punto, pero no van a poder bromear ni saber 100%, van a entender. Hay unos falsos amigos también que no van a entender. Igual también en Bulgaria, no van a entender todo. Yo cuando voy con mi mujer, por ejemplo, y hablo búlgaro, y a veces la gente no entiende cuando hablamos entre nosotros en Macedonia. Y es un poco así, al revés. Depende, hay que estudiar un poco, no mucho, porque son idiomas bastante similares y hasta un cierto punto se entienden bastante bien. Pero En mi cabeza, por ejemplo, yo solo puedo decir de mi punto de vista. Sueco y noruego para mí son idiomas, sí, pero hay, para mí la diferencia es la misma entre sueco y noruego que entre búlgaro y macedonio, para mí. And it's hard to tell where the line is for eggs. It's very difficult to tell. I can see there are an awful lot more questions. I'm so sorry I'm not going to get through them all. But thank you. I will do my best to see what else I can do. I will. If you like this topic, please do feel free to write your thoughts. I'm very happy to sort of read them and hear more about them. And then next week I will do my best to pick another topic that will hopefully be interesting for you. And if you have any thoughts or ideas of what you want me to talk about, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And I'll be happy to accommodate as much as I can, whether that's today or another day. Thank you all so much for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, wherever you are in the world, and I will speak to you again next week. Bye, everyone.